Welcome back, everyone, and we will get underway now with our 3 o'clock panel. It is Equine Surgeries in the Developing Horse, and I will be moderating this panel, and I have an esteemed group of panelists that really need no introduction, so I will keep it brief. Dr. Larry Bramlage, surgeon at Rood and Riddle, David Ingordo, bloodstock agent, Garrett O'Rourke of Juddmonte USA, and Mark Taylor, the president of TaylorMade Farm. Again, an esteemed group. I'm really looking forward to this panel, and in the prep work for it, I feel like I walked away with a wealth of information, so I hope you have the same experience that I did. So right out of the gate, let's establish the 2 major surgeries that would occur in developing racehorses, and if you could explain what would necessitate them and what those procedures entail. Dr. Bramlage, maybe you could take that.
How's that? Yeah, there we go.
Perfect.
Well, there are, you can do lots of surgeries to yearlings, but the 2 big elective surgeries are surgeries to take care of joint issues or remove them for the most part, and then conformation corrections, angular limb deformities for knock-knees, bow-legged, toed-in. Most thoroughbreds tend to be toed-in and bow-legged, as opposed to most other breeds tend to be knock-knee. But we have knock-knee thoroughbreds as well.
And what are those procedures to make conformational corrections? Well,
what you basically do is, while the horse is still growing, you arrest the growth on one side of the growth plate. So in other words, if the horse toes in, which is more common, you would put a screw across the growth plate on the outside of the growth plate, and then as the inside growth continues to occur, it bends the leg in the direction you want to go. And you can do that in the lower leg, which stops growing about 4 months. The growth plate disappears at the bottom of the cannon bone, or what we call fetlock joint deformities at 6 months, roughly. And in the knees, or the carpus, which is actually the distal radius, it stops growing in the neighborhood of 18 to 20 months, but you do that roughly at a year of age in order to make the corrections in the knees. What you want to do is, if you make the correction too early, the genetics of the horse will tell him to grow back the other way. So what you want to do is make the correction near enough the end of growth so that once you make the correction and take the screw back out, the horse doesn't have enough time to grow back the other way. That's why the growth plates in the lower limb disappear faster than the upper limb. So that's why you do weanlings or foals early in their career, under 4 months of age, and why you do yearlings to correct their carpus and their knees at around a year of age.
Now, are there different philosophies between breeding to race and breeding to sell, and do the practices look any different?
You want Mark?
Okay, I'll take that one. Yeah, I think for sure. I think that, as we all know, as breeders, everything's gotten more commercial. If you go back 75 years ago, there was a lot more breed to race operations. There also was not these advancements in correcting horses. So you had to just kind of do your best with what God gave you, I guess. And things have evolved, the industry has changed, and you can have debates on and on about whether that's good or bad, but it is what it is, right? So I could go on about this for 10 minutes, which I won't do, but I think
we have plenty of time.
Yeah, what we've seen is that the corrective procedures Dr. Bramlage was discussing have gotten much less invasive, much more precise, and just keep this in mind. If you're somebody watching this and you're trying to make sense of all this stuff, I think from our perspective, what we're really trying to do is raise the most correct horse possible. So if you're raising the most correct horse possible, they should also perform better, and they're also going to sell better. So, that's what we're trying to do, and we're always trying to balance developing a really correct horse that's good for the market while minimizing time they're locked up in the stall. So I think in the very primitive ages of trying to put screws and wires, and these techniques did not just instantaneously get like they are now. I can remember in the beginning, we were trying to do these procedures, and a lot of horses got really, probably limited on what they could do on the racetrack because it just didn't go well. But it's really gotten a lot better, and 9 times out of 10, it's seamless and it's minimally invasive when you're doing those full fetlock surgeries in particular.
Now, Garrett, with homebreds primarily being your operation of business, is it less important to be pursuing a perfectly conformed animal if they don't appear that way?
Absolutely. I mean, I think our motivation always is to produce a horse who can maximize his racing potential, and the visual correctness of it is not, it's not paramount to us. But I think, obviously there are different people with opinions on what we do to these young horses, and sometimes they get a little bit those opinions get a little bit polarized. And definitely there are people that think you have to do it organically and never touch a horse, and then there are, people like say, or that's archaic, you've got to jump in there and be very aggressive. And I think the beauty of raising them as racehorses, and also the beauty and less beauty, I suppose, is of me having a lot of grey hairs and been around for a long time, is you get to observe, like Mark said, where you get it right and where you get it wrong. And I think we're landing somewhere in the middle at the moment. We absolutely want a perfect racehorse, and some of the horses that are born incorrect are not going to be effective racehorses if they stay very incorrect. And those horses, we do jump in and try and get them to a point where they can be racehorses, and we're not so much worried about them turning up at the sales. But we also get to know our families really well, and we know what conformation runs very well in our families. And if we know that a certain family runs very well with less than perfect conformation, I would be inclined to leave those alone and let them be racehorses with the conformation that is effective for that family. And I would say definitely we do a lot less surgeries than people that, and I totally understand why they do it, going to the sales and needing a perfect horse. We do less surgeries than them, but we absolutely do surgeries on horses that, in my opinion, would not be racehorses and would not be sound racehorses if we didn't intervene.
Well, let's fast forward to the sales and discuss the sales themselves. Is there an increasing pressure to have a perfectly conformed horse, or this idea of a flawless vetting? David, have you seen that shift in recent years?
Is it on? I think it depends on who's buying the horse. If you're part of a team, and like Garrett has an entire team of people that are all in singing from the same hymnal when they buy a horse or raise a horse. Mark is presenting a horse to a buyer like myself, and I have my own group that I work with and for, so we can be more forgiving because there's nobody trying to throw me under the bus later on. I live with one of my trainers, so it's kind of like we talk about it and we live with what we have. I've been blessed to always work for trainers and owners that they knew we did our best when we were buying, and a lot of times we were assessing risk with what the vet issues the horse had. So there's no perfect horse, period, and a lot of the perfect ones are slow. So we're looking for things that we can live with. Dr. Bramlage and I were talking about it earlier. He's seen a few of my sales horses that came from here under his knife lately, but it's normal things that those horses live with. It happens to everybody. It happens with what we're asking them to do. We're getting horses ready. They get hurt. None of it is end of their career. So for me, where I'm very, very fortunate is I'm able to use the best vets, the best experience we have, and put the horse in a program and take some shots. Not every horse can be bought for $1 million or whatever. We're looking for things up and down the price range and trying to get some things we know will be okay in the long run, whether we give them time or, do a procedure or whatever it may be.
There's certainly a range of acceptability, but there are some things we know are detrimental to the horse's career. Offset knees with bow-legged conformation in the knees, those horses, they don't last. And so in that situation, the correction of the deformity is important both for the horse's race career, but even for the horse to sell. But that range of acceptability is much wider for David than it would be for Mark if he's taking a client's horse to the sale. The more people he can keep involved and interested in that horse, the better the horse is going to do.
Well, none of you are green in this industry, and do you think that the practical experience kind of helps looking at the entire picture, sometimes understanding how things work in actuality rather than just what's in front of you, and this idea that there are so many new faces and novice pin hookers and owners in the industry right now? Do you think that with the world of information at their disposal, that there's an uptick in folks who are kind of really critical or seeking perfect images that just don't exist?
I'll answer that. When I was a kid, I grew up on a racetrack, and I thought the horses were born out of the back of a Sally van. So I never saw a foal. A lot of them came from Garrett because when I was younger, Bobby trained for Juddmonte. And then I was blessed to get to attend UK, but I really learned at Juddmonte. And you see these things. So between the racetrack, between seeing what these horses were, and then getting to hear from people like Dr. Bramlage or go into the sales. And, Mark's job is very different than mine. So we're probably learning from each other as a seller and buyer. And, I guess I got lucky that I got to have the experience I did. It's very different than the average person that they give you the catalog. When you walk in, you can steal the pen, and all of a sudden you're in business buying horses. And I think that's something I take advantage of as a buyer, that I feel bad for Mark in his job having to sell, because Mark's trying to present a horse, and Dr. Bramlage touched on it, that anybody can accept. So when it walks in here, they can bid whatever their budget is. I'm doing more akin to what Juddmonte does, is I'm looking for a racehorse. So experience, and there's many people that have experience out there. It's just the younger people I see in the crowd, the more you can learn what the actual horse is supposed to do, that this isn't the finish line. It's a quarter mile up the hill there. That's the real finish line. The more you can learn what it takes to get the best racehorse. I was watching Dr. Morrissey with the feet. How many times, you see a lot of those feet on racehorses. I see a lot of them on sales horses. I just got done with 2-year-old season. It's atrocious what happens to those horses' feet, even more than the conformation.
And Mark, could you talk to that a little bit, or any feedback that you get from trainers in how it dictates what preparation you do for your sales horses?
Yes, well, I think with our horses, the ones, especially the ones we raise on our farm, because that's what I can speak to, most, just completely about our process. But if you look at, there's a lot of different ways to try to get that horse to walk in a straight line and not get thrown off lists, because the other thing is, which David has alluded to, there's people that are in a hurry. You get to the September sale and you got a lot of ground to cover. You got all these horses. So they employ shortlisters, right? And they send them through there and they got to make a quick decision. Well, that one toes in right front. I don't want to get in trouble with my boss. I'm throwing that one off, right? I got 40 horses to look at here. If I leave 15 on, that one's going off.
It's the worst of speed dating in some ways, right?
Right, yeah. Right, exactly. And most of the time, we know, because we sell a lot of horses and we track all these horses and how they do, and then we go back and look at their notes and we look at their videos, and it's like David said, we sell a lot of really expensive, perfectly conformed horses that can't run, and we sell a lot of horses that have imperfections that end up being Grade 1 winners. So it's a great learning process for us to do that. But back to my original point, you've got a lot of ways, you got a lot of pathways to try to get to that sale ring. And what I see personally is not in Garrett's case, because I totally agree with Garrett. I mean, if I had the Juddmonte scenario going, I think I would do exactly what he's doing. But with us, we've got to get the most correct horse. There's two ways to do it. You can either not address the fetlocks early, and so then you are going to be working hard on those feet the entire horse's life, right? You're going to be working. You're going to, a lot of things that the previous presentation was talking about. You're going to be putting a lot of correction on the outside, trying to keep that horse out. You're going to get a distorted foot. So you're actually, while the horse might walk straight, you're going to deliver a product to the next person who gets it that they got an uphill battle keeping those feet right. So we think that by doing the corrective measures on the fetlocks early, we're able to keep the integrity of the feet, which ultimately is the most, I think, more important than anything. So that's the beautiful thing about the horse business. There's a lot of people that are really good at what they do, and they have different philosophies and different approaches. And there is no one way. There's no, this is the magic program that's going to lead you to the promised land. But everybody's got to do it the way they can execute it the best and do what's right for the horse. But I can say to what David said, I think in my dad's era, back in the 70s and 80s, the typical person buying horses had a very well-rounded background in all aspects, typically. And you were showing horses to, legendary trainers a lot. A lot of the trainers now don't have the same background as trainers back then. And then a lot of them don't even really go to the yearling sales. So you've got a lot of people who are not quite as well-rounded, and they might be completely offended by a horse that's not perfect walking to you. And in my opinion, they're discounting, they're reducing their pool of horses to pick from unnecessarily. But you have to react to that as a seller, right? You got to keep those people in play because they control a lot of money.
So where are the areas that you try to make the most changes that you've found people really respond to the most, or the areas that are non-starters for a lot of people?
Well, this is our old yearling manager, John Hall, who passed away a couple years ago, but he would say, Mark, anybody can tell when a horse toes in, right? Not everybody can tell if a horse is an athlete. I mean, it's a much more subtle, nuanced thing, but we've got to get them where they walk straight, because almost everybody can pick up on that. And if you lose them, so that's what you can't control some things in conformation. If a horse has a, big heavy neck and they're heavy fronted, you can't control that really, but you can control how their front limbs walk at somebody. So that's the biggest thing we do. One thing I'll just interject here is I have a very low budget when I'm buying mares. I don't own a lot of mares, but I own a handful at any given time. And the way I try to find value is I go to try to find a mare, like a Juddmonte mare, that's got some back family, and she's really crooked. Like, I don't mean like towing in like
we
one
don't
out
breed
of
them that way.
Oh yeah. Well, it's some of those you thought were going to run anyway, and
The
maybe
ones
they didn't
that
quite
fall
make
off
it.
the family tree?
Yeah, but I try to find something with family, and they're really, really crooked, and I'm just like, those fetlocks weren't addressed. Mm-hmm. But if she throws a baby that does have that tendency, I can fix that, and now I get the rest of the gene pool and a body that I like, and all I got to do is fix that one variable, and usually I can get something I can afford. So, I'm not Tessio or anything, but I'm, trying to breed a good horse and make a few bucks and do it within my budget. So that's an approach I take, which just speaks to.
And thanks, Mark. That's going to help us sell all of our culls.
Yeah. I still can't afford yours. People buy them even if they're crooked.
We are living in the age of information, so let's speak to the importance of the repository and the disclosure of the procedures. Dr. Bramlage, could you start?
Well, you have to disclose if you've been in a horse's joint at all. There's also a few other things you have to disclose. Abdominal surgeries that are not umbilical hernias, something that's more invasive than that has to be put in the repository. And just like we've become more educated with the angular limb deformity correction and what Mark touched on, rather than keeping the mare and the foal in the stall for long periods of time while you're corrective shoeing, you can do it faster and better, and the mare gets out if you just put a screw in his ankle. So we've gotten better. Arthroscopic surgery has made it possible to improve the longevity of the horses, and if you look at, in 2008, the Welfare and Safety Committee was brand new, and our first endeavor was to define some of the things that the public press was saying, most of which were not well-founded, let me say. And we looked at the percentage. One of the things we looked at is the percentage of horses that started races. And it varies somewhat over time, but there's a remarkable uptick in the early to mid-90s. And in trying to explain what happened there, that's when the repository came in. If you look at, I think 92 is about 66% of the foals born started. And when you get to 96, it's up to 66% early on, 72% later on. In a relatively short period of time, there's a pretty good increase in the percentage of foals that made it to the races. And I think a big influence of that was the repository. And the reason being is when you take care of joint issues early on and prevent the disease, it's much more effective than trying to treat it after it's already occurred. And so there are certainly things that are removed arthroscopically that David could tolerate, and we all know that they don't really have to, but Mark can't tolerate some of those taking him to the sale because he's got to deal with those agents who, if there's anything on the sheet of paper, they cross the horse off. So you got to bring the best horse you possibly can, but there are certainly things that affect the horse's performance long term that if you take care of them early on, the horse stays sounder. And I think the data shows that, and I think the repository is responsible for most of that, because initially it's not 1 year that you can look at, because initially the repository was used only for the expensive horses. And in the consigners, because of the expense of just making the x-rays, and consigners pretty quickly learned that that was disclosure. And if you put the horse's radiographs in the repository and somebody bought it and it had a flaw that is intolerable, that's their responsibility, not his. And so over a few years, it became commonplace to x-ray all horses. And then that went on to the homebreds. And initially, nobody did homebreds, but then the people with homebreds began to learn that there are certain things you want to take care of early because they affect the horse's race career. And if you get rid of them, then the horse has a better chance.
Now, we had a terrific panel earlier on aftercare. So my next question to that point would be, have you found there are any long-term soundness implications for horses that do have these procedures in their second career or in whatever their life looks like post-racing if they go on to being breeding stock or riding horses?
You want me to take that? I think as data, we got a project ongoing right now that the Thoroughbred Safety Committee is helping us with. It's actually looking at horses that have had corrective procedures compared to the other population. They're going to turn out to be equal. It doesn't hurt them. The horse, what you see and buy is what you get. How they got there doesn't really matter, other than I do agree with Mark as saying that severe correction on the foot, and what Dr. Morrison was saying, a severe correction on the foot to try to influence a knee, you've got 3 joints in between you. And you can affect those joints adversely by the severe shoeing, and that horse may have a permanent problem that you created. So I think you have to be judicious in all aspects, but whether you're a jumper, that the horse's conformation is going to be, a horse's soundness is going to be on the conformation you see. It's turning out with the data. I've seen the early data. The early data is going to show that what you see is what you get. It doesn't matter how that horse got to that conformation. And there are certain conformations that we can't tolerate, bow-legged. There are certain conformations in the racing thoroughbred that are not good for the horse. That's significantly knock-kneed horse are inefficient if you watch them go. They're like egg beaters whenever they're coming at you. Now, there are a few horses that overcome a knock-knee conformation based on how they move. But in general, if you're significantly knock-kneed, you're not a very efficient mover.
Now, I think there's sometimes a narrative that the breed is becoming less durable. Can we discuss the cumulative effect of horses that go through multiple sales before they reach a racing age? Is that maybe contributing to some of the issues we see with longevity?
For me as a buyer, the less a horse has, the longer he or she's been allowed to be a horse, the better. I don't totally buy that the breed is weaker, personally. I think we're running cleaner horses than we ever have, as far as joint injections and the permissive use of anabolics that used to happen. So I personally, when I'm buying, I like to go to people that are breeders. If they are pinhookers, meaning they bought the horse here and they resell it later on, I don't like them to be through too many sales, because by the nature of sales prep, the horse is not outside a lot. So for me, the more they can be outside, the more they can be horses, the more they can, run around and bang in their buddies. I use the analogy, it's like tackle football. You practice with pads on. So if you never practice with pads on and then you go out in a game, you're going to get creamed. Horses are very much the same. So I work with Lane's End a lot. They balance between raising a racehorse and raising a sale horse. And that's allowing the horse to be outside as much as possible. They come up and they're checked, and we do surveys and we clean up joints and things, but the quicker we can get them back out in the field, the better. I think it's better for them, their cardiovascular systems. I think it's better for their respiratory system, their bone development, the soft tissue development, feet, everything is better the more they can be a horse. But there's a lot of economics here, and some horses don't get that opportunity because they're going through multiple sales. So I'll buy a horse that's been through a few, but I personally prefer them not.
The data would say no, that it doesn't affect them. In that same study I was telling you about in 2008, we looked at the percentage of horses that raced as they went through weanling sales, yearling sales, and 2-year-old sales. And every sale you went through, the probability of racing went up 5%. Now that would make sense because you're selecting those horses. What horses you don't know are the ones that were disqualified or effectively winnowed out for some reason going through those sales. But just the fact that they went through a sale was not detrimental. In fact, it improved their probability of racing. So I think the data shows that you can do it correctly, and David hit on what I think is the most important point. Horses are meant, they are evolved as grazing animals. They're meant to be in the field. Their bones develop best the more time they spend running around in the field. And we don't know how many hours that is a day, but if you look at horses who are out grazing and see, they will graze at about 6 to 8 hours a day, and then they go stand in the corner, and wherever they go, I don't know where they go, their head, they just sort of zone out. One of them's on guard, but the rest of them are standing there.
Yeah.
That's when they're plotting
chilled
ways
out.
to cost us money.
Yes.
So,
if I could comment on that, I think if you're working around horses and raising horses, you get to observe all the reasons why certain horses and problems happen. And I think from years of observation, when we started doing screening x-rays, and again, as Dr. Bramlage said, we didn't always do it, but as an operation that races all of the horses that we raise, and then you go year after year and start comparing results. But we start seeing problems in certain horses, or horses having a lot more issues, and then remembering, oh, he had colic surgery and he was up for a certain amount of time, and or else if there's a different horse gets caught up in an accident or something and you lock him up. And I think the younger the horse is, the more likelihood that a month later you see a swollen hock and you x-ray it and there's an OCD in there. If we leave young foals up for a length of period. On a regular basis, we'll see all 4 ankles blow up, and that's, Dr. Bramlage again could explain it more from a veterinary point of view, but my understanding is it's cartilage flaking off, and they're not able to get out and run and buck and kick and develop their strong bone. So locking, that's to explain the theory behind the need for horses to be outside, constantly stressing their bone, and anything that we do to take that away from them for any longer period of time is probably going to lead, possibly, I wouldn't say probably, because there's certain bloodlines that are just tremendous, no matter, you can't stop them from being sound racehorses, but there are equally other bloodlines that are much softer, that I've learned over the years, and you don't want to dare them to go wrong on you by letting them locked up and prevent them from hardening their bones and their tissues.
And Mark, how do you balance that, kind of treading both worlds of letting them be horses but also preparing them for sales?
So yeah, I think that's probably one of the misperceptions about our operation that is the most frustrating for me, because my dad, if there was one thing, he would say, the stall is the enemy of a young horse, right? And he would just drill it. And, it didn't matter whether it was 2 feet of snow or whatever. Yearlings ought to be outside at night. They come in, check them over, like David said, feed them, make sure they're okay. They're right back outside. And, they're herd animals. They're gaining toughness by being out there competing with one another, running. So that's very much embedded in what we do. We have to try to balance that. The one thing, we had a kind of a pre-conversation and we were bouncing ideas around. And so Dr. Bramlage said something that was interesting. And he said, these little P1 chips that get cleaned up, I mean, that's a serious percentage of all the joint surgeries that we're doing, are these P1 chips. He was saying, and correct me if I'm misstating this, but the front ankles, yes, there's data that shows you got to clean those up. Some of these back ankles, you're just doing it mainly so nobody can pick of it. It's kind of like the green agent who might pick on a horse for toeing in just slightly. I think there's some degree of vets who have never been or don't know how to portray it to their customer that, like, hey, it's a little flake in a hind ankle, don't worry about it. So my dream scenario is you minimize, like, I wouldn't do those. I hate locking those horses up, when they're in that peak growth, maturing span of their lives, which is, between birth and 24 months. That's where a lot of this is done. I use the analogy sometime with people that are new to the business. I'm like, if you took Kobe Bryant and you just locked him up in the apartment for 3 years, now I don't know how that correlates to 2 or 3 months on a young horse, but it would be something extreme like that. Well, maybe he just didn't develop like he was supposed to, the cardiovascular or whatever made him such a great athlete. So we're always trying to balance just letting them be horses with also giving them the best advantage. Sometimes there are joint surgeries need to be done to give them the best, because some of these things are going to bite them eventually. If you don't take them out now, you're going to take them out when they're 2 years old and maybe they've already done some damage to the joint. So it's a big, we talk about it all the time at TaylorMade, and we're just trying to get them outside. Back to David's point on the sales, I totally agree with David. Now, I don't buy horses, I don't buy prospective racehorses for people, but even though the data might say, Dr. Bramlage might be right, I would still have some hesitation. If I looked down and I was buying a 2-year-old and I'm like, man, he sold as a weanling, he sold as a yearling, he sold as a 2-year-old, he hadn't had much time to be a horse. Now, I just have a hard time believing that he's going to be a stout, but I do think there's different approaches. We used to keep all of our babies up at night when we were prepping them for the November sale 20 years ago. And they would be slick and they would look good and their hair coats would look great. But what we found is they were getting upright in their pasterns because they're standing around the stall too much. They're eating too much grain and not burning off all the energy. And so now we don't bring them up at night. We bring them in a few hours in the morning and they go right back out. Now, if it's an ice storm or horrible weather, we might bring them in. And what we found is the weanling pinhookers, like the Peter O'Callaghan's and the people, they're sharp, Brian Graves, the people, they would actually rather buy a horse with a little hair on them that don't look quite as polished, but the bone looks better, they're not upright. So we can't control a lot of these things. Like, you know, you have to leave a horse up till 7 o'clock at night as a yearling to keep it from getting sunburned. That's just the way it is. But on these weanlings, we've really tried to just, we call it soft prep, like brush them off, paint their feet, get their manes laying over, but, you know, just let them be organic, and the sharp people are going to find them. And that just eliminates one more variable tilting in the direction of producing a soft horse. So that there's different approaches to all these different sales prep things is what I'm saying. So that would be valuable information for me if I was a buyer. I'd be wanting to know, you know, how did you get this horse ready?
That data that I was referring to, those horses didn't all sell in all 3 sales. They were,
Okay.
that's population data. So
Okay.
if you look at horses that sold as weanlings as a group, and horses that sold as yearlings as a group, horses that sold as 2-year-olds as a group, just the fact that they were prepped for a sale in that population
Increases there.
Yeah, I mean, but they're winnowed every time you go through, because you're going to have the pin hookers for getting the 2-year-olds. They're not going to accept every horse because they know that they're not going to stand
probably,
up.
yeah.
And the other study that Mark was referring to that we talked about is the literature doesn't always tell the truth. I think. So that's a study in 2003 done on the last years of the radiographs that were taken before the repository. So those were radiographic reports of what the horses had at the time they went through the sales. And for the few of us who were around back at that time, those horses were x-rayed after the sale, not before they went in. They were x-rayed after they were bought. And then that study concluded that there were 2 things that affected a horse's long-term racing performance: chips in the front of the hind ankles and chips in the lower joint of the knees in front. Well, the reason that hock OCDs and chips in the front ankles didn't show up in that data was that as soon as those horses came out of the sale, they would line up at Hagyard's and Rood and Riddle and at Peterson and Smith, and they would have the hock OCDs and the chips in the front ankles taken out.
So they weren't there.
They weren't there when this data was looked at. But what it did show us, that chips in the front of the hind ankles do affect the horse's performance. And in the lower joint of the knee, they do affect the horse's performance. Now, that lower joint of the knee is something that everybody knows, that once you injure it, the probability of re-injury is significantly higher because of the reason it got injured in the first place. That's usually a conformation issue, and the horses tends to be bow-legged or offset knees. They load the inside of the knees a lot heavier. But the hind ankle chips, you can get rid of them. The pieces in the back of the ankle, unless they're significantly big, make very little difference. So they didn't show up in the data. They weren't affecting the horse's performance. But some of the, let's say, green agents and green veterinarians too. There are veterinarians that will not pass a horse if he's got a fragment anywhere on the repository. There are tolerable areas. Everything's a matter of degree, you know, where you have the problem, whatever. But hock OCDs and chips in the front ankles, those have been taken out since the arthroscope came along. And that data showed that was a good thing. But it also showed you probably should take the pieces out of the front of the hind ankles as well.
Okay. You know, the one thing I think could happen in the future, and maybe this technology is not too far off, but, you know, humans are all using our Apple Watches, and we're constantly charting how much movement we've got every day and all this stuff. But if that same technology was implanted in a horse, right, and when that horse is going to auction, you could just look at it and say, it had 87 sedentary days in its life, right, and it didn't move around much every other day, or it had 0. You know, that is going to be data that I think would be extremely important. You know, nobody ever knows if a foal had pneumonia and was locked up for, you know, a month. And to me, that would be the scariest thing. It'd be much more scary than conformation issues. So that's something that's probably going to get better in the future, and buyers would know, it would reward breeders who could use more of an organic approach and keep them out longer, and it would be more of a balancing act. Hey, we want that score to be really good, so we're going to do everything in our power to keep them outside moving around. Just a thought.
I mean, David, as a buyer, what would you think of having access to that sort of data, just hypothetically?
Well, I was thinking about it as I'm hearing right now, like, I don't want to say it's anecdotal because I looked at 800 yearlings before last year's September sale. So I go and I look because I have people that help me, but my favorite shortlister is me. And I make the decisions often. So we try to do that. So one of the reasons I started doing it was to try to learn how farms raise horses. And it really comes to play at the 2-year-old sales, how a horse is trained and the foundations put under him. We were having a discussion at lunch, and there was an unpleasant incident here at Keeneland to a horse, but in my opinion, that horse wasn't really prepared to even race from the foundation it got at the 2-year-old sale, or in the pre-training before it even got there, how you break and train and put a foundation.
Could you elaborate on that a little bit more? Or the foundations that you are looking for in a young horse?
Well, every horse I buy, I mean, I love two things, to win races and bet on horses. That's what I love. That is my whole reason for being every day, So I figure, well, how do you make the best racehorse? So once you buy them, that's only the start of the process. And I work very closely with the Mayberries. They're ex-racetrack people. They've trained Oaks winners and Breeders' Cup winners and everything else. When those horses go in and they begin the breaking and training process, everything we do is to teach them to eventually, come here to Keeneland, to Rice Road, or wherever you've got your barn at. So what are they going to do? They're going to get out and they're going to train. They're going to gallop, they're going to jog, they're going to gallop, they're going to need to learn to be tied for grooming because that's what you do. You don't ground time, you don't, cross time like you would a sport horse. You tie them to the back of the wall or whatever. So we put a lot of foundation in our horses. They train every day but one. Most horses get a day off. Like at the track, if we train a horse for 13 days and it didn't breeze, they get a walk day after they breeze. The 14th day, we just give them a day off. They'll get a day where they walk. So everything we do in the preparation of a young horse from the day we buy it at Keeneland and it goes to Ocala or wherever it's broken is to get it a foundation for that. That foundation builds cardiovascular strength. It builds skeletal strength. It builds muscle strength. And then, things happen during the process. Like I said, Dr. Bramlage and I were talking about, horses get issues. We stop on them the second it happens. We address them. One of the good things about addressing problems in the pre-training or before they actually come into the racetrack is with the regulatory, there was a panel on it. We used to leave old chips in there, and if the ankle got a little big or whatever, it wasn't a big deal. Today, it's tougher, so we're cleaning up joints to be proactive so the horse hopefully doesn't have a problem. When you're getting ready for the Derby and that old chip all of a sudden starts to aggravate the horse, what happens now? So all that goes into it, but we like to put a really good foundation under a horse. The good people that do it, that are knowledgeable, understand to get the horse fit and get them prepared for what they're going to do, and then you gradually start speed work. People think, when you say we breeze the babies for the first time on a farm, they go, oh my God, did it show up in Equibase? No. You have to do it to build the concussion, to stress the horse, to get them gradually ready. And, every couple weeks we do a speed work. I'll, call it in my reports to my client. They understand it a little better. And you do that gradually. You build them up. They go 16. Well, actually, most of them go an eighth, add an easy quarter. Then each thing progressively faster till finally they're up to about 3/8 when most trainers will take them in. Well, those horses are ready to come in and go forward. Now, that's if you're going to the racetrack. The 2-year-old sales are a vitally important part of the market. I'm a big fan of them. We bought a lot of nice horses out of it. But sometimes, I call it like quarter horse training, they really don't put the foundation under them. It's more for speed. Their fitness comes from maybe swimming, which I am not a fan of because I think it uses different muscles than what you do when the horse is racing. If I found out a horse has been swimming, it doesn't mean I don't buy them. It just means I go back and we start them. We don't re-break them, but we put the foundation back in them. So some horses come out of a sale, and if you aren't knowledgeable as the buyer, not every buyer has the time to be in Ocala or wherever it is like I do for my profession, because that's what I do. They go and they buy a horse and they take it on face value. They probably should ask a few more questions. Hey, can I see your training chart? It doesn't matter what's been done. You should be able to take that horse and then get it the way you want it and move it forward. And sometimes I think that just gets skipped, and I can look at how things happen. And it's my hunch. I'm not saying I'm right or wrong here, but I know what I think. Some of these horses probably needed more foundation before they get started. And lots of them run, but sometimes when you see something happen, you go, maybe that could have been avoided.
Well, I do think one of the most wonderful things about horses are the way they constantly push us to do better as we know better. And I think that's largely due to the research done by our friends here at Grayson. So my last question for everybody, are there any best practices for you in your operation that have changed as you've known better as a horseman? And we can just start and go down the line.
I would say that as a really, really young and keen horse person, and my dad was a vet, and so I had the benefit of being able to read veterinary journals and new machines that could help, and practices that maybe were the cutting edge, and I was keen to be ahead of everything. And so I was as a young manager, I'd say fairly progressive, and I pushed a lot of things, and I'll admit today I made a lot of mistakes, and learned to realize that Mother Nature is much smarter than we ever give her credit for. And even though I still try to help the horse as much as I can where I feel the horse needs the help, but I think allowing, as everyone on the panel I think agrees, allowing the horse to be a horse and let it to get its nourishment out of the ground from grass, not trying to push it with supplements and not trying to use too many drugs, and not to go overboard on using the word organic, but just let horses be horses, let them get as much foals, get as much galloping, bucking, kicking, fighting, being competitive, everything that teaches them to be a good racehorse, keeping them out, as Mark says, as much as possible, right through to even, we break and pre-train all of our own 2-year-olds, and until the 2-year-old colts start to tell you, okay, you're getting a little bit too rough now. But even as 2-year-olds, early 2-year-olds, we let them outside and we let them fight, and the fillies very close to when they're going into training are still turned out, and just let them be horses as much as we can. And then it's like all of us, it comes a point in time where our education is over and you got to go to work, and they are race horses, and then they go to the track. But as much as we can keep it as close to Mother Nature as we can until that point in time, I think that benefits the horse.
And Mark, what have horses taught you along the lines?
I think patience. I think horses are, constantly trying to teach humans to be patient. Then sometimes you just want them to be 100% at a given time, and they're just not ready, and you got to just back off and give them time. But I think the number one thing that I've learned is I think we used to overfeed our horses, especially young yearlings and stuff. I think we used to just pour so much feed to them, and they were generally too fat, and we got a lot of, we got too many bone problems because of that. I think kind of leading into what, or following up on what Garrett said, you know, you try to give them, we want our horses to be well-raised, well-fed, but a little on the leaner side than what we would have had back in the 80s and 90s. I look back at some of those horses we took to sale, and I'm like, I mean, you get laughed out of the barn if you took them over there looking like that today. So I think we used to grossly overfeed them, you know, 30, 40 years ago.
And Dr. Bramlage?
Well, I think the one thing that sort of fits in both what, I'm going to say something about what Mark said and what David said both. Horses are meant to steadily get better. They grow 20 times the size, they grow to 10 times or 20 times human size, depending on whether you're talking about me or Mark, but in 1/10 the time of a person. So that means they got to form their bone so fast, and bone is most important in the growth. So anything you can do to steady that, the better off you are. That also fits their GI system as well, because you make abrupt changes in what you're feeding a horse, you're more likely to get colic or something like that. So putting a good foundation under them at maybe about 25 years ago or so, this idea of you gallop them to death, and all of a sudden it's the calendar says we should breeze them, is the absolutely wrong way to go. That's not a foundation. That's what some people indicated. The foundation is built gradually the whole time. Now, we know probably about a month doesn't really affect the horse's progress too much if you have to stall them for a month. You put them in 2 months, and you're beginning to get behind because all this energy that we used to feed the weanlings and the yearlings is encouraging the early stage of development. I mean, bone grows by cartilage growing, and then it has to convert the bone. And you can encourage that cartilage growing, and if you're not pounding the skeleton, it's not converting the bone, and so you get an OCD. And that's particularly true of pig fat weanlings that sold at the sale, and you turn them out when they get home, and they haven't been allowed to exercise like they normally would, and you end up with stifle OCD. So now there's a reason for that. It has to do with the age and how the horse develops and so on. But that's one place where I think you should be particularly careful, and that is prepping weanlings to not get them too fat and too restricted exercise, because everything is a gradual improvement until you get a racehorse. And then the same thing goes for training. It has to be gradual. Not every horse can stand the being trained by the calendar. You have to respond to how they're doing it, so you need to do gradually for that horse. And you can't just take 200 yearlings and train them all according to the calendar and expect they'll all reach the Kentucky Derby, because they can't.
And David?
Dave said it all pretty well, but I think, you know, we talk about the calendar. So when you're racing, it's that time of year. How many going to run at Saratoga? Who's running at Saratoga? Especially when it comes to 2-year-olds. And I've been known to be a bit of a smart ass. I told one of my clients, you know, Saratoga runs every year. This horse may not run this year at Saratoga, but it may run next year. And it's, what do you want to do? You want to have a career? Do you want to be patient and give this horse every opportunity, or do you want us to just win one race and be done? So I've learned you've got to be patient, to develop these horses individually. You know, anything we're doing here, it needs to be private school versus public school. You know, these horses need individual attention, and if you give them all that attention and you develop them the right way and you listen to them, don't be an ostrich and avoid the problems. If it's got something that needs addressing, whether it's just to turn it out, whether it's to take the chip out, whether it's to, you know, give it X number of days for the juvenile tendonitis, whatever it is, if you give it time now, it will reward you later. But we have to be willing to be patient and allow the people that are working with your horse to give you that news, and then you take it well to do a good job by allowing the next step to happen.
Well, that's just about all of the time that we have, so I want to thank my panel for such a great discussion. I learned so much. We'll have just a minute or two, and then we'll get right into the next panel, and I'll introduce that in a moment. Thank you, guys. That was wonderful.